One of the strangest stories of World War II is the story of sneak craft attack, favored naval weapon of the have-not nations. By swimmer, by human torpedo, by midget submarine, explosive boat, and torpedo boat, the Axis powers strove with considerable success to whittle down the naval superiority of the Allies. The Allies learned vigilance the hard way, to the tune of thousands of tons of warships and merchantmen sunk and damaged. In the Mediterranean alone, at Alexandria, at Ceuta Bay, Gibraltar, and Algiers, Italian sneak craft accounted for 150,000 tons of Allied shipping. The simplest form of sneak attack is the swimmer, using a tight-fitting rubber suit to protect him from the cold and swim fins to increase his striking range. He could reach targets up to 5 miles. The breathing apparatus developed by the Italians showed great skill in design. The single oxygen bottle allowed the swimmer to work underwater for at least half an hour, plenty of time to finish his deadly mission. For attacking shipping, their limpet mines and floating charges contain from 4 to 40 pounds of super explosive. They wrecked the Nijmegen Bridge by guiding 1,500-pound charges down the river. And throughout the war, they successfully blew up locks along the inland waterways. In attacking ships, the swimmer almost always approached the targets on the surface, relying on his head net to camouflage his face from the lookouts. On reaching it, he put on his nose clip and his mouthpiece for underwater breathing, filled the lung with oxygen, and submerged quietly to the bilge keel. The charge was pulled down after him and clamped to the side of the hull. The time fuse, with its 4-hour delay, was started, and the attack was done. Score for the swimmers: the Nijmegen Bridge, many canal locks, but only a few Allied ships. The most successful Italian sneak craft was their version of the human torpedo, the Siluro Lente Corso, the SLC. Popular opinion to the contrary, the SLC was not a suicide craft. It was a modification of a standard torpedo that carried 2 men and 2 heavy charges to the target. The 2 280-pound warheads were in turn clamped onto the nose of the torpedo for delivery and were readily detachable at the scene of action. One of them was easily capable of breaking the back of a merchant ship. Together, they could, and did, put a capital ship out of commission for a year. The craft was designed to put as little strain as possible on the operator during his long ordeal. Simple airplane-type controls for the hydroplanes and rudder, motor switch with 4 speeds forward and 4 reverse, electric pumps to fill or empty the ballast tanks. The overall length of the SLC was 22 feet, and it weighed a little over 1.5 tons. The 2 high-pressure bottles carried enough oxygen to last the torpedo men for from 5 to 6 hours of continuous use underwater. The captain of the craft sat in the forward position. He handled the controls and did the navigating. Cruising range was 15 miles at a cruising speed of 2 knots. In December 1941, 4 of these craft scored a triumph roughly equivalent to a major sea victory. Slipping into Alexandria Harbor undetected, they proved the craft's superior maneuverability and unusual striking power. Each pilot approached to within 50 to 60 yards of his target with only his eyes above water. At night, detection was almost impossible. Then he submerged and ran slowly and silently to his target. Each craft jockeyed to position under the bilge keel. While the captain held the craft there, the number 2 man ran a line from one bilge keel to the other, detached the warheads, and placed the charges firmly in position directly under the keel. The time clocks were started, and they drove away. In this manner, 2 British battleships, the Queen Elizabeth and the Valiant, and an Allied tanker, 80,000 tons of shipping, were sunk in Alexandria Harbor in a single night. Later, at Gibraltar, they were able to bag 9 British and American merchantmen. This constant threat of surprise attack was almost as much of a strain on the Allies as the 150,000 tons of shipping actually damaged or sunk. The Germans were inevitably attracted by these spectacular Italian successes, and by the spring of '44 had organized a picked corps of 10,000 officers and men. Their first successful craft was a one-man human torpedo. The real torpedo, the child, was slung below the mother, which carried it to within close firing range of the target. Every detail of the design and operation of Marder was carried out with typical German thoroughness. A welded steel trailer assured rapid delivery at the launching point, and camouflage nets preserved the secrecy of the operation. Here was a fairly effective weapon whose mobility was such that it could be quickly concentrated for mass attack. As originally designed, the German one-man torpedo was purely a surface craft. Through inexperience, the first ones beached harmlessly at Anzio Beach without firing their torpedoes. They were the subject of more curiosity than alarm. But later, in the summer of '44, they carried out successful surprise attacks. The low silhouette of the craft running awash with only the dome visible made the run-in on a dark night relatively easy. But once he had fired his torpedo and his presence was known, he was quite helpless against counterattack. The Germans could ill afford to sacrifice their trained men, and the next craft were made able to dive. Marder was found to be fully operable at depths up to 90 feet. It handled well and maintained an even course, with a speed of 1.5 knots, as contrasted to a surface speed of somewhat over 2 knots. Her ability to dive thus immeasurably increased her effectiveness, and the sturdy seagoing qualities of the craft underwater exceeded anticipations. The operators even found they could perform radical maneuvers without losing control. However, the operator could not see underwater well enough to make an attack. His run-in to firing range was usually made awash. Even under these conditions, visibility was something less than ideal, making extremely close range necessary before the torpedo could be fired with any degree of accuracy. 50,000 tons of shipping were thus sunk or damaged in the last year of the war, an amount out of all proportion to the Marder losses suffered by the Germans. The development of the Midget submarine by the Germans is another chapter in the story of sneak craft attack. First in point of time was Molk, an all-electric one-man midget. She filled the essential requirement of ease in handling by truck to the point of launching and by truck or crane into the water. Molk was not very successful. Her range was a mere 75 miles, and she was slow and cumbersome on the surface. Her batteries, which filled the whole forward part of the craft, could drive her at up to 4 knots. But the swells in anything but the calmest seas battered her oversized hydroplanes unmercifully. Yet she had her good points underwater. These same hydroplanes gave the operator excellent control of his craft, and she submerged and surfaced with fair success. Under actual operating conditions, she failed to measure up, and after two 15-boat sorties in which all craft were lost, she was abandoned. Her successor was the streamlined Beaver, which sacrificed strength for speed. A gas engine was added for surface cruising and recharging the batteries, but her normal range was still restricted to approximately 75 miles. The concavities in the hull permitted the torpedoes to be carried outboard without greatly increasing the bulk of the craft. But they in turn weakened the hull to a considerable degree. Beaver, with her 30-foot overall length and 6 tons weight, was still small enough to be launched and maintained at quickly constructed strategic points. In her trials, she proved faster and more maneuverable than Mulk, but she was also tricky to handle, hard to navigate, and afforded only restricted visibility to the operator. After Mulk was abandoned, Beaver was used constantly against shipping to the port of Antwerp. She had small success and suffered heavy losses. In 15 sorties, using 163 Beavers, 53 of them, almost a third, failed to return. Beaver was being used as a stopgap until the new Midget sub, Seehund, was ready. Seehund came into action in December of '44. The German engineers had at last found a small submersible that overcame the annoying limitations of the other craft. Seehund had the great virtue of being mass-produced. She was, in essence, a trimmed-down model of a full-size submarine and incorporated many of the best features of the British X-craft, which carried out the raid against the Tirpitz in her Norwegian fjord the previous year. Her propeller was fitted with the Korth nozzle-type rudder, similar to that of full-size German submarines. The glass observer's dome on the hatch cover safely withstood water pressure to depths of 150 feet. Her diesel drove her at 8 knots on the surface, and she handled admirably. Here at last was the best midget submarine German engineering skill could produce. The captain called the orders to the engineer, who handled all the controls. He kept her smoothly at periscope depth while he was coached into the target. He made ready for firing and diving. He fired the torpedoes at command, and the fish slipped off the track on its run to the target. Take her down, and down they went as the captain took a last quick look through the periscope. Underwater, her small size made it almost impossible for the warships to find her. Listening gear was incapable of detecting her propeller noise at slow speed, and it was very difficult to ping on her small hull. About 70% of the Seehunds made attacks on Allied shipping before the war ended, though in many cases the crews missed their targets through lack of experience. Through the periscope, they swept the sky for aircraft before surfacing to recharge batteries and for a breath of fresh air. The morale-breaking loneliness of the one-man craft was gone.